The glass in my trembling hand caught the light as the wedding coordinator gestured toward the very last row. "Row 13, seat 9, she said in a rehearsed smile that didn't reach her eyes. The words felt heavier than they should. It wasn't just a seat, it was a statement. Your presence could be distracting. Vivian had told me earlier, her perfect nails tapping against the seating chart like tiny hammers. My own son, Brandon, had stood quietly beside her, pretending not to notice the sting in her words. That was his specialty these days. Selective silence. Well, at least they were consistent. I took a deep breath, adjusting the sleeves of my navy blue dress, the nicest thing in my closet. My name is Eleanor Peterson, I'm 68 years old, and this is my son's wedding. 3 years ago, I buried my husband, Richard, after a long, merciless battle with cancer. I thought I'd already lived through the hardest chapter of my life. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the quiet humiliation my only child would put me through today. The Harrington estate spread across acres of manicured gardens and glittering marble fountains, looking more like a movie set than a wedding venue. Guests mingled in designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly pension. I tried to hold my head high. I had every right to be here. I was the groom's mother, even if they'd rather pretend otherwise. The back row was nearly empty except for a few latecomers and a catering attendant arranging champagne flutes. I could see Vivian's mother, Margaret Harrington, seated proudly in the front, surrounded by Denver's upper crust. Their eyes flicked toward me as if studying a rare and pitiful species. As I made my way down the aisle, conversations dimmed, not out of respect, but awkward curiosity. "That's the groom's mother," someone whispered. "Didn't she used to clean houses or something?" Another murmured. They weren't completely wrong. I hadn't cleaned houses, but I had taught high school English for 37 years. That didn't seem to impress this crowd. I finally reached my assigned seat, almost touching the parking lot. From there, I watched my son laughing with guests near the altar, looking every bit the successful attorney. Handsome, confident, admired. For a fleeting second, I remembered the boy who once brought me dandelions and called me the prettiest mom in the world. That boy was gone now, buried beneath ambition and embarrassment. Then the music began. Vivian appeared, gliding down the aisle in a dress so dazzling it looked sculpted out of moonlight, and probably cost more than I'd earned in a year. She didn't glance my way. Brandon's gaze stayed locked on her, full of pride and admiration. I wanted to feel joy, but all I felt was distance. As the ceremony started, I forced a smile and told myself that being invited at all was something. It could have been worse. They could have excluded me completely. That small mercy was apparently the only kindness left. And then, something strange happened. A deep voice beside me said softly, "Act like you're with me." I turned, startled, and saw a man sitting next to me. Silver hair, tailored gray suit, confident posture. He looked effortlessly powerful, the kind of man who made heads turn without trying. Before I could respond, he placed a gentle hand over mine and smiled like we were old friends sharing an inside joke. Whispers immediately rippled through the nearby rows. "Who's that man with her? He looks important. Maybe we misjudged her." The energy around me shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't the lonely old woman in the back row anymore. I was someone. The man leaned closer. "Your son's about to look this way," he murmured. "When he does, laugh, like I've just told you something fascinating." And I did. Sure enough, Brandon's eyes swept across the crowd and froze when they landed on me. His face paled. Vivian noticed his distraction, following his line of sight. Her perfect smile faltered when she saw me, no longer isolated, but seated with a mysterious, distinguished companion. The man's hand squeezed mine gently. "Perfect," he whispered. "Your son looks like he's seen a ghost." I turned to him, heart racing. "Who are you?" I whispered. He smiled, that slow, knowing kind of smile that carried 50 years of unspoken memory. "Someone," he said quietly, "who should have been in your life a very long time ago." Before I could respond, the minister's voice rose again, calling for the exchange of vows. I barely heard a word. My thoughts were a storm, confusion, curiosity, and a faint, impossible recognition. Could it really be him? As the newlyweds shared their first kiss, polite applause filled the garden, crystal laughter, camera flashes, and all the glossy perfection that money could buy. But I wasn't clapping. My hands were frozen in my lap, my heart pounding against my ribs. The man beside me stood, offering his arm like a gentleman from another time. "Shall we join the reception, Eleanor?" he said softly. And this time, hearing my name on his lips was like a shock of electricity. He knew me. I rose slowly, taking his arm. Heads turned as we walked down the aisle together. Whispers followed us like shadows. The woman who had been invisible an hour ago now had every eye in the garden on her. The same guests who'd pitied me were suddenly curious, even cautious. Who was this man walking beside the embarrassing mother? He guided me toward the reception tent. The sun was dipping low, washing everything in gold. I could feel Vivian's gaze on my back, sharp as broken glass. She was smiling for the photographers, but her jaw was tight. "You never told me your name," I said quietly, glancing up at my mysterious savior. He smiled, that same familiar, half-amused curve of lips that made my breath hitch. "Theodore Blackwell," he said. "But you used to call me Theo." My steps faltered. The world seemed to tilt. Theo. I hadn't spoken that name aloud in 50 years. He had been my first love, the boy who'd made me laugh until my ribs ached. The young man I'd promised to wait for when he left for a business program in London. But he never came back. I'd cried for months, then finally convinced myself he'd forgotten me. I thought he was gone forever. But here he was, older, silver-haired, elegant. The boy I loved had become a man carved out of power and patience, I whispered. "Theo?" "But that's impossible. You're supposed to be in Europe, married, with grandchildren by now." He led me toward a quiet corner of the garden, away from the curious eyes and chatter. Up close, I could see faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind that only time and heartbreak could etch. "I never married," he said simply. "And I never stopped looking for you." The words hit me like a tidal wave. 50 years of silence, rewritten in a heartbeat. I blinked, trying to steady myself. "Looking for me? You left and never came back, Theo. You vanished." I had no choice but to move on. He shook his head slowly. "No, Eleanor. I wrote to you, dozens of letters. I called your apartment for months. When I didn't hear back, I flew back to Denver twice. You were gone every time. Your mother said you'd moved?" My throat tightened. "You got sent letters?" He nodded. "You never got them, did you?" And then, like puzzle pieces snapping together, the truth hit me. My mother. She'd never liked Theo. She'd said he was too rich, too different. She'd warned me I was chasing above my station. When he left for London, she encouraged me to focus on my future. And when I started dating Richard a few months later, she was almost relieved. "She threw them away," I whispered. "She hid your letters." Theo's jaw clenched. "I suspected as much. By the time I found out, it was too late. I came back again in 1979 with a private investigator, but by then you were married and expecting your son." I looked down, overwhelmed by the cruel precision of timing. Just 2 years too late. If fate had been slightly kinder, everything could have been different. He sighed, studying my face. "I didn't want to ruin your life, so I stayed away. I told myself if you were happy, that was enough for me." My eyes stung. "Happy," I repeated, the word trembling. "I was fine. I had a good marriage. But a part of me always wondered why you disappeared without a word." Theo's expression softened. "And now you know. It wasn't by choice." The orchestra's music swelled in the distance, drawing laughter and applause from the crowd. For a long moment, we stood there in silence, two people surrounded by the noise of a celebration that didn't belong to us. Then he said, almost shyly, "Eleanor, I don't want to make a scene at your son's wedding, but after today, can we talk? Properly?" I nodded, my throat too tight for words. "Yes, please," he smiled, relief flooding his features. "Good. Then let's give them something to gossip about until then." Before I could ask what he meant, he reached for my hand again, leading me toward the reception tent. Cameras flashed. Heads turned. The whispers returned, thicker now and tinged with envy, curiosity, and disbelief. Vivian's expression was priceless, a mix of confusion and fury barely hidden behind her perfect bride's smile. Theo leaned closer and murmured, "Your son is watching us again." Smile for him, the kind of smile that makes him wonder what he's missed all these years. And I did. For the first time in a long while, I smiled not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The reception tent glittered with chandeliers and laughter, an entire world of polished manners and quiet cruelty. Waiters floated between tables with trays of champagne, while a jazz quartet played something elegant enough to drown out discomfort. Theo and I entered together, every head turning our way. The hush that followed was almost theatrical. A woman in pearls whispered something to her friend, and they both turned to stare. Moments ago, I had been invisible. Now I was the subject of every whispered conversation in the room. Vivian's mother, Margaret Harrington, was the first to recover. Her trained society smile didn't falter as she approached. "Eleanor," she said coolly, "I didn't realize you'd be bringing a guest." Theo smiled, extending a hand with quiet authority. "Theodore Blackwell," he said. "I was just in town and couldn't resist seeing an old friend on such a special day." Her expression faltered. Everyone in Denver's elite circles knew that name. Blackwell Industries, global holdings, skyscrapers, real estate empires. He wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful. "Of course," she said, recovering fast. "Welcome." But the tightness around her eyes betrayed her panic. Theo guided me toward a table near the center, not the back this time, and pulled out my chair like a proper gentleman. "You don't belong in the shadows," he murmured. I could feel eyes boring into my back as I sat down. For once, I didn't shrink under them. Brandon approached moments later, his bride in tow. Vivian's expression was brittle, like glass under pressure. "Mother," my son began, voice tense. "Can we talk?" Theo stood first, meeting Brandon's gaze with calm confidence. "Of course," he said smoothly, "but perhaps introductions first." Brandon hesitated. "And you are?" "Theodore Blackwell," Theo said again, offering his hand. "A friend of your mother's." Brandon's handshake was automatic, his confusion obvious. "I see. I don't believe she's ever mentioned you." Theo's tone was deceptively light. "How interesting. Eleanor and I share a history. Quite an important one, actually." Vivian's painted smile cracked. "What kind of history?" she demanded, voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. Theo's eyes twinkled. "The kind that matters." The silence that followed was heavy enough to bend steel. I could almost see the calculations flickering behind Vivian's eyes. Status, image, control. My son looked between us, torn between embarrassment and curiosity. Finally, he said, "Mother, may I speak with you privately?" I smiled politely. "Of course, dear. But I believe anything you have to say can be said in front of Theo." Vivian's jaw tightened. "Mr. Blackwell, this is a private family matter." Theo's expression never wavered. "With all due respect, Mrs. Patterson, I've seen how your family handles private matters, by humiliating people who deserve better." Her eyes widened. Brandon's face flushed crimson. "Now wait just a minute." "No," Theo interrupted calmly, his voice cutting through the room like a knife through silk. "You wait. I watched your mother sit in the back row today, treated like an inconvenience. I listened as your guests whispered about her like she was an embarrassment. And now, after years of sacrifice and love, this is the thanks she gets?" A silence fell so thick it could have drowned the music. Vivian's face went pale. Brandon looked like he'd been slapped. I wanted to speak, to soften the blow, but the truth was, every word Theo spoke had been buried in my chest for years. Brandon opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Vivian tried to gather herself, but Theo wasn't finished. "You see, Brandon," he said, his tone still polite but unyielding, "you've built your reputation on prestige and power, but none of it would exist without her. That woman raised you, worked 2 jobs to send you to law school, and never once complained. You don't repay that kind of devotion with shame. You honor it." My son's eyes finally met mine, really met them, and I saw guilt there. Real human guilt. "Mom," he whispered, "I didn't realize—" "That's the problem," Theo said, his voice softening. "You didn't realize." "But I did." Vivian's lips trembled. "Mr. Blackwell, we didn't mean—" He cut her off with a smile that wasn't quite kind. "I'm sure you didn't, but intent doesn't erase disrespect." The musicians had stopped playing. The entire reception was watching now, wealthy faces frozen mid-toast, champagne glasses hovering mid-air. Theo turned to me and extended his arm. "Eleanor, would you like to leave? I believe we've outstayed our welcome." For the first time in my life, I didn't hesitate. I placed my hand on his arm. "Yes," I said quietly. "Let's go." Gasps rippled through the crowd as we walked out of the tent, my heels clicking against the stone path. I didn't look back. At the gate, Theo opened the car door for me. "You handled that beautifully," he said. I laughed, the sound shaky but real. "I don't think I've ever walked away from anything in my life." "Then it's about time you started." The car pulled away, the lights of the estate fading behind us. For the first time in years, I felt free. The city lights shimmered against the car windows as Theo drove, his profile lit by passing street lamps. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, it was thick with all the things we hadn't said. Finally, I turned to him. "What did you mean? That tonight was only the beginning?" He smiled slightly, eyes still on the road. "Let's just say certain people will soon realize how expensive it is to underestimate you." I frowned. Confused, but before I could ask, we pulled up to a restaurant that looked like it belonged in another world. Glass walls, soft lighting, and a view of downtown Denver that sparkled like stardust. A valet opened my door before I could move. The Blackstone, I read the sign aloud. "I've seen this place in magazines." "I own it," Theo said simply, helping me out of the car. "Come on." We missed the wedding dinner, but this will make up for it. The host greeted him by name, bowing slightly. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwell. Your usual table is ready." As we were led to a corner overlooking the skyline, I couldn't help but laugh softly. "Your usual table? How often do you come here?" "Only when I want to remember what peace feels like," he replied. "And tonight seems like a good night for that." We sat down, and I suddenly realized how surreal the day had been. The humiliation, the reunion, the confrontation. Now here I was, sitting across from the man who'd once promised to build a life with me. The waiter brought 2 glasses of deep red wine. "To rediscovering what matters," Theo said, raising his glass. I smiled. "To second chances." For a while, we talked about small things like the food, the music, the view, until he leaned forward and asked, "Tell me about your life, Eleanor." "Not the parts people already know. The real parts," I hesitated. "Well, I became a teacher. I taught English for nearly 4 decades. I married Richard. He was kind, steady, dependable. We didn't have much, but we had enough. When he got sick, I took care of him until the end. After that, life got quiet." Theo listened without interrupting, his eyes soft with something like admiration. "You built something real," he said. "That matters more than anything I ever did." I laughed quietly. "Says the man who owns skyscrapers." He waved a hand dismissively. "Buildings crumble. What you did, shaping young lives, raising a son, that's legacy." His words made my throat tighten. "My son doesn't see it that way. To him, I'm just outdated. An inconvenience." Theo's expression darkened. "He'll learn soon enough that the world changes fast, especially when the people he looks down on start standing tall." I gave him a curious look. "You keep saying things like that, Theo. What are you planning?" He smiled enigmatically. "You'll see." Dinner arrived, stuffed mushrooms, pasta, and steak so tender it melted on the tongue. The kind of meal I'd only ever seen on television. For the first time in years, I felt treated, not tolerated. After dessert, Theo leaned back, studying me quietly. "You know," he said, "for 50 years I thought about this exact moment, sitting across from you again. And now that you are?" I asked softly. I wish it hadn't taken half a lifetime. The confession hung between us, gentle and raw. I looked out the window at the glittering skyline. "Maybe we needed to live our separate lives first," I said. "To become the people we were supposed to be before finding our way back." He smiled. "Maybe you're right, but I still plan to make up for lost time." The mood lightened after that. We shared stories from the past, nights at cheap diners, dreams we'd whispered under streetlights, the silly plans we'd made before life took them away. At one point, he chuckled. "Do you remember how you used to steal the olives off my salad?" I laughed. "I did not." "You absolutely did. You claimed you didn't like wasting food." "I stand by that," I said, laughing so hard tears pricked my eyes. It felt good. Too good. Then, my phone buzzed. 17 missed calls. All from Brandon. Theo glanced at the screen, amused. The prodigal son discovers curiosity. Messages poured in. "Mom, call me back immediately." "Do you have any idea who Theodore Blackwell is?" "Vivian's father needs to meet with him about the downtown building purchase." "Please call me," I sighed, showing Theo the screen. "Well, that didn't take long," he smirked. "Interesting how quickly people find respect once money enters the picture." "What are you going to do about the building?" I asked. Nothing, he said casually. Business is business, but if someone close to me suggested a good reason to reconsider, I might listen. I raised an eyebrow. And what would that reason be? He leaned forward, his voice dropping low. Simple. That the people involved learn how to treat others with decency. I stared at the phone for a long moment before answering. Vivian's voice sounded nothing like the confident socialite from yesterday. It was soft, careful, almost nervous. Eleanor, she said again, we'd really like to invite you and Mr. Blackwell to dinner tomorrow. Just to clear the air. I could almost hear Brandon whispering in the background, coaching her. Of course, I said sweetly. Let me check with Theodore and get back to you. The pause that followed was delicious. Vivian wasn't used to waiting for anyone's schedule but her own. Yes, of course, she said finally. Please let us know what time works best for you both. After I hung up, Theo was already smiling. Let me guess, he said. They've suddenly remembered you exist. Something like that, I said, smirking. Apparently, you've made quite an impression. He raised his glass. 2 impressions, then. The right kind can change everything. The next evening, Theo picked me up in a deep navy suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. I wore my black evening dress, the one Richard used to call my lucky charm. You look stunning, Theo said as he opened the car door for me. I felt myself blush. I'm nervous. Don't be, he said, offering his arm. This time, you're not walking in alone. We arrived at one of Denver's most exclusive restaurants, the kind where waiters glide like ghosts and water costs as much as wine. Brandon and Vivian were already there, sitting side by side, but visibly tense. Mother, Brandon said, rising awkwardly as we approached. Mr. Blackwell, thank you for joining us. Theodore, he corrected warmly. No need for formality. We're practically family now, aren't we? Vivian's smile tightened. Practically, she echoed. We were seated at a candlelit table with a panoramic view of the city. The staff hovered with the kind of deference that came only from wealth, or fear of it. Vivian spoke first, her tone sugary and rehearsed. Eleanor, you look absolutely wonderful. That dress is very flattering. I almost laughed. Yesterday I had been a source of shame. Today I was a vision. Thank you, dear, I replied sweetly. It's amazing what good company does for the complexion. Theo chuckled softly beside me, squeezing my hand under the table, a quiet gesture of support. After a few minutes of polite small talk, Brandon cleared his throat. Mom, I want to apologize for yesterday. For everything. I didn't realize how poorly things looked from your perspective. I tilted my head. From my perspective, Brandon? Or now that your new father-in-law's business depends on it? He flinched and Theo hid a smile behind his wine glass. Vivian jumped in quickly. Eleanor, that's not fair. We truly regret how things were handled. We were overwhelmed. Overwhelmed? I repeated softly. Vivian, I sat in the back row of my only child's wedding. If that's how you handle being overwhelmed, you might want to rethink your priorities. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through glass. Theo finally set down his fork and leaned forward. Since we're being honest, let's be honest. You didn't invite Eleanor here to apologize. You invited us because you're afraid. Vivian's hand trembled. Afraid? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of losing your family's building, your reputation, your comfort. Isn't that right? Brandon shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Theo, that's not true. Theo interrupted, his voice calm and steady. Then tell me, Brandon, if I weren't in Eleanor's life, would she even be sitting here right now? Brandon opened his mouth but couldn't find an answer. The truth hung there, naked and undeniable. Vivian's face flushed, but she recovered quickly. Perhaps we can start over, she said. We'd love to have you join us for Sunday dinners, as family. 6 months ago, those words would have made my heart swell. Tonight, they just sounded like strategy. I'll think about it, I said, smiling politely. Theo and I have quite a few plans. Her smile faltered. Theo leaned back, amused. Speaking of plans, there's something you both should know. Business isn't just about contracts, it's about character. When people show decency, I respond in kind. When they don't, he let the pause hang just long enough to make them squirm. Well, consequences follow. Vivian's fork slipped against her plate with a soft clink. I reached over and placed my hand on Theo's. Let's not talk business tonight, I said lightly. I'd rather enjoy the company of people who are suddenly learning the meaning of respect. Theo's laughter was low and genuine. As you wish. Dinner ended in an uneasy truce. Brandon tried one more time to bridge the distance, offering to visit me next weekend. Vivian smiled too hard, complimented my earrings, and left behind a generous tip for the staff, the kind of gesture meant to remind everyone watching that she still had control, but I saw the truth in her eyes. She was shaken. As Theo and I stepped outside, the night air felt crisp and clean. The city glittered like a promise. Do you think they've learned their lesson? I asked. Theo's smile turned mysterious. Not yet. But they will. Margaret Harrington stood at my doorstep like she owned the world. Immaculate hair, pearl earrings, and a perfume so strong it could command attention from across a ballroom. Mrs. Peterson, she said, her voice smooth as silk but twice as cold. I trust I'm not disturbing you? Not at all, I replied pleasantly. I was just making tea. Would you like some? She blinked, clearly not expecting kindness. No, thank you. I'll be brief. She stepped inside before I could invite her, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor like a metronome of control. I believe it's time we clarified a few things, she said. I folded my hands. By all means. Margaret studied me for a moment, perhaps trying to decide whether to attack or negotiate. Your friendship with Mr. Blackwell has caused quite a stir, she began. Vivian and Brandon are unsettled. The media has already noticed, and frankly, it's not ideal for anyone's reputation. I smiled faintly. Ah, reputation. Such a fragile thing, isn't it? Her eyes narrowed. You may think you have leverage because of your connection to Theodore. But I assure you, Mrs. Peterson, our family has survived far worse than gossip. I met her gaze steadily. Then you should have no reason to be here. For the first time, her composure cracked just slightly. She sighed, glancing away. Look, Eleanor, you've made your point. You embarrassed Vivian, humiliated the family, and turned the wedding into a spectacle. I'm willing to overlook that, if you convince Mr. Blackwell not to interfere with our business matters. So that was it. Not a conversation, a bargain. I almost laughed. You want me to control Theo? I want you to influence him, she corrected. Surely you understand that his actions could cause serious damage, not only to us, but to your son's career. The audacity of it nearly made me speechless. I took a breath. Mrs. Harrington, for years, your daughter treated me like I was beneath her. She turned my own son against me. And now you come into my home to threaten me, politely, of course, for defending myself. She lifted her chin. I'm protecting my family's interests. And I said quietly, am protecting mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked softly, measuring the weight of every unspoken truth between us. Then she straightened, her smile returning, brittle and polished. You're smarter than I expected, Eleanor. I see now why Mr. Blackwell is so fond of you, I returned the smile. And I see why your daughter learned her manners from you. Her expression faltered. Without another word, she turned on her heel and left, the sound of her heels fading down the walkway. I watched through the window as her black car disappeared around the corner. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I felt powerful, not because of Theo, not because of wealth, but because I had finally found my voice. That evening, Theo arrived with dinner and a mischievous smile. You had a visitor today, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. Margaret sent one of her spies to report back? Something like that, he said, chuckling. Word travels fast in their circles. They're worried, Eleanor. And that's not a bad thing. I don't want revenge, I said quietly. Just respect, Theo's gaze softened. And now you have it. We ate together in the glow of my little kitchen, laughing over memories and the absurdity of it all. When the meal ended, he reached across the table and took my hand. You know, he said, you don't need to keep living in the shadow of who they think you are. You've earned your peace, I nodded slowly. Maybe I have. But peace feels strange after so many years of silence. He smiled. Then let's fill it with something better. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the night sky. I've been thinking, he said, about starting something new, a foundation perhaps for teachers. In your name. A way to give back. My breath caught. Theo, he turned, eyes shining with quiet conviction. For all the women who gave up dreams for their families. For the mothers who were made to feel small. You taught the next generation, Eleanor. Let's make sure the world remembers that. I felt tears rise, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were from gratitude. From being seen, I stood and placed my hand gently over his. "I'd like that very much," I said. Outside, the city hummed, alive, indifferent, and endlessly bright. Somewhere across town, Vivian and Brandon were probably still talking strategy, still chasing status. Let them. I had something far rarer now: dignity, closure, and the quiet power of self-worth. Theo turned to me, smiling softly. "Do you know what the best revenge is, Eleanor?" I met his eyes. "Living well?" He grinned. "Exactly.